call this meeting right to order.
You have one of them, Sam.
We can wait for our... Okay. So we'll call this meeting to order at whatever time it is. The first item is folks have reviewed the meeting minutes from our last meeting. We have a motion to approve those.
I have reviewed them. I have no objections, changes, and I would move approval.
Any discussion? Anybody any changes? You all in favor? Approving the minutes? Do we have any members of the public here for public comment? No? Okay. Then on the consent agenda, items 3, 4, and 5, did anybody have any questions or comments? Okay.
No, I defer to you. Brain power, buddy.
On the first one, the fee adjustment, I understand the logic, notwithstanding the fact that the current indices seem to be going quite high. We're staying with the 2%, and apparently the logic is if we look at a cumulative comparison, it's roughly equal between, but it just uses one of the three indices. Is there any information on the second and third indices of how they look cumulatively?
Morning.
Hi, Ray.
Hi. So, one of the things that we're tasked with is to take a look at the percent increase in the CPIs, and the CPIs are extremely volatile. And so what we ended up doing is we ended up taking a look at the indices over time. We traditionally used the California, or the Los Angeles ENR CCI. So we looked at that particular one, and we looked at that for the trend, and that one showed that over the time period 2008 through 16, what we've been collecting, that it was lower than 2% on average. So cumulatively, like annual increase, and so we recommended a 2% for this
I understand that, and your paper clearly shows that. I was curious, you also mentioned on an annual basis, you look at three indices. You showed us the cumulative impact of one of the three and said it justified it nothing more than a 2% increase. I was wondering whether the second and third indice would have called for something different on a cumulative basis.
I didn't look at the cumulative on the other two because it wasn't the one that we were historically looking at, but we certainly can do that. The IHS Global is a new one that we looked at. The Caltrans Construction Cost Index, the other one, we have the information for. So I can take a look at
the other one is the one that normally, that's your golden rule anyway.
Right.
Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, my question is this, and I'll have to defer to Ariana since she's been here the same amount of time as I have. Do you remember when we had a discussion about applying this fee or not applying it to things like assisted living units? I want to make sure we change something in the ordinance. Do you remember that a number of years ago?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that this isn't going to impact the change we made maybe 5 years ago.
No, there was an ordinance amendment and a change to the board policy to reflect exactly what you are mentioning there. So,
okay. Can I just clarify for the rest of you? What happened is, whatever number of years ago it was, they were applying the same fee to things like, was it assisted living?
Very low. So in the first paragraph of the attachment to your report, it refers to units constructed for extremely low, very low, low, and moderate income households, which may be exempted.
Right, but this was in particular, they were applying a lot of fees to something that I guess San Diego really needed, which was very low income assisted living units, and most of those people do not drive in assisted living units. It was centered on people around 70 and older, and yet they wanted to apply these fees because they said they needed it for roads, yet, you know, they don't, and these units didn't even have enough parking spaces for each unit because people don't drive.
It was,
So,
I recall, I can't we'll try to look for it. It was with regard to a project in National City, if my recollection is correct. Yeah, they're building assisted living units, and therefore, while the requirement would require so much bespoke development fees, we did make the change in that policy. We can double check whether it was in the ordinance itself or in one of the board policies that implements rules.
I just want to make sure that, because we had a big discussion about that, and I think it was a good decision to make. Otherwise, you find people who won't do it, because by the time they pay the fees, there isn't enough left in it to make any money.
Yeah, it isn't at the end of the board policy, so it talks about a unit not having a bathroom, a permanent kitchen, built-in kitchen facility. It goes into cooking ranges, refrigerators, sinks.
Okay, good.
So that is addressed in the board policy 31.
Thank you.
Anything else on items, consent items 3 and 4? Okay, so then, Ariana, your report.
Yes. So this is your summary of actions that the Transportation Committee and the Board of Directors have taken since your last meeting in January. The Transportation Committee received a report on the Senior Mini Grant Program project evaluation results, and that's on your agenda today. And then in addition, staff presented the regular quarterly report regarding the Smart Growth Incentive Program and Active Transportation Grant Programs, which you saw at your last meeting as well. And then the Environmental Mitigation Program Annual Status Report, that was presented last week to the Transportation Committee, and that's on your agenda today as well. And then finally, you may recall that you received a presentation at your last meeting regarding a proposed change to Board Policy 31, having to do with clarification regarding consistency between the ordinance and the policy, the definition of public meeting versus public hearing, and the board did approve that change at its meeting in January, which you had recommended.
Any questions? Item number 6, Audrey, Virginia's going to fill us in a little bit on the project evaluation results.
Good morning. As background, the Transnet Extension Ordinance includes a provision for a competitive grant program to award funding to specialized transportation services for seniors aged 60 and older. The Senior Mini Grant Program provides Transnet funding to support innovative and cost-effective projects that provide improved senior transportation. Eligible applicants include local government agencies, social service agencies, nonprofit organizations, and the Consolidated Transportation Service Agency. Eligible projects include shuttle services, volunteer driver programs, non-emergency medical transportation, and mobility management activities. Additionally, projects must be derived from the priorities identified in the coordinated plan. Funds are available for operating, mobility management, and capital projects with a required match. And grant requests must be within a range of $30,000 to $200,000 per year. The Senior Mini Grant Program requirements are further outlined in Attachment 1 of this report. The Italk provided input on the eligibility and evaluation criteria for the Senior Mini Grant Program at its July 13, 2016 meeting. And on July 22nd, 2016, the SANDAG Board of Directors approved the evaluation criteria and released the call for projects. Applications were due October 24th, 2016. An evaluation committee of experts in the field of specialized transportation scored the Senior Mini Grant projects using the board-approved criteria, which is included in the staff report as attachment 2. Approximately $3.1 million in FY 2018 and FY 2019 Transnet funding is anticipated to be available this funding cycle. A total of 26 projects were submitted. 22 were determined eligible and 4 were determined ineligible for funding and were withdrawn. These projects were determined ineligible because they did not meet the minimum grant funding request of $30,000 per year. Combined, the eligible projects requested more than $5.1 million. Based on the available funding and the preliminary ranked project list, which is included as attachment 3, 10 of the 22 eligible projects could be fully funded and 1 project could be partially funded. As Ariana mentioned, this item was brought to the Transportation Committee as an information item on January 20th. On March 17th, the Transportation Committee will be asked to recommend that the Board of Directors approve the funding recommendations. Pending approval by the Board of Directors, SANDAG would would send notice of award to grantees, and projects would be included in the 2016 Regional Transportation Improvement Program, or RTIP. It is anticipated that grant agreements will be issued in fall 2017. So today, the Italk is asked to review and discuss the list of proposed senior mini grant projects from the most recent call for projects for Transnet funding eligibility. This concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
One question. The description here says these projects are supposed to be focused on innovative and cost-effective efforts.
Yes.
And in reading through what obviously is a very limited description of the project, how innovative are these? They tend to all sound like everybody's doing the same thing, just in a different geographical region.
Right.
Is there much innovation? I know one of them had an Uber-like type app involved in it, something, but I was curious how innovative any of these things really are.
That's a good question. So innovation is a subjective category in our criteria, so that's up to the evaluation committee to award points as they see fit. Something to note is that in our coordinated plan, when we're updating the coordinated plan every 2 years, we update our priorities as well, and we've noticed that a big priority, especially due to funding shortfalls and just limited funding being available, is maintaining the services that we already have. So that is one of our priorities, is to maintain existing programs, but we always encourage cost-effective programs, and I think that's where we might see the innovation, is how people continue to keep delivering trips at a low cost. So I think I agree with you in terms of innovation. That's kind of a subjective subject matter, and so.
Is there any merit or any possibility of considering consolidating these different efforts? As I said, they all seem, from the limited description, they're doing the same thing in different geographical areas. They're different entities, presumably, each of which has to do their own matching. But I'm wondering whether there's any cost efficiency, since they're all effectively doing the same thing, whether if they were to merge or reference or somehow, but it's simplified and reduce costs.
I think that the competitive nature and the competitive process of these grant programs, in a way, is consolidating, as you mentioned, the use of funds, because only the top projects are receiving funding. So only those projects are given the funds. And in terms of geographic region, we do see a good distribution of areas served and not much duplication. And we highly encourage coordination among our providers. So a lot of times they're either serving a niche, if there is crossover geographically, they're either serving a niche organization or they're providing a different type of service, and there's always cross referrals between our providers.
And you guys monitor, per the previous reports, the schedule and the cost efficiency of the efforts. Is there any effort to assess and monitor the effectiveness of it? In other words, there's so many rides and it costs so much a ride, but I'm the rider, I wait for an hour for my ride or something. It's very ineffective from my point of view. Is there a way to monitor that?
Right, that's part of our ongoing monitoring. So we have what's called a monitoring checklist, and we actually use that same checklist as our past performance adjustment, which is within the criteria. There is definitely a section on service quality, and so we are monitoring how satisfied the customers are. A lot of our providers have customer satisfaction surveys, and they have written into their scope goals to achieve 90% satisfaction, and a lot of them track on-time performance, for example. So yes, that is monitored.
You can ding me even though I'm very highly cost efficient. If my customer satisfaction is poor, I'll get down checked.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I respond to one of the things that they brought up? The question about you talked about, do we actually plan for the services? So the way it works right now, right, there's a pot of funds, people apply their criteria, and so the ones that are ranked higher with the criteria right to the top, they're funded. It has been brought up sort of in discussions with this most recent round of grants. Is that the way, while that works and that's our process, and it efficiently sort of allocates monies to the top performers, but if you step back and look at the region as a whole, are we covering all the areas, all the duplications, so it may be the most cost efficient, the ones that are, like I said, highly ranked, but when you step back, is it still serving the broader needs? So one of the things we are considering and actually proposing in this year's budget work program is to do specialized transportation sort of strategy. Kind of take a look at it from a broader perspective and go, are we putting the money in the right areas, in the right place? Do we have geographical representation? Are we ensuring, niche services, both seniors and the low income and that such. So it's something we are trying to look at, marrying the process we already have, but also having a sort of bigger picture that looks at it a little more holistically.
I was going to ask, are you proposing unfunding all of these or just giving us a report? In other words, I see you have all these projects here, and one that I cannot support, and I see it has a very low score. It's the last one on the last page. It sounds like the same one that I took issue with about 4 years ago.
Okay, so there is a very, very small line where it says funded and unfunded. It's kind of hard to miss. So there's only 10, I think I mentioned in my report, 10 that are being recommended for full funding and 1 recommended for, and you'll see in the columns,
Okay.
yeah, I think it's on page 19, it says
I'm
projects not
happy.
recommended
You don't
for
have to say another word. I'm happy.
And you'll notice there are zeros in the columns for recommended amounts of grant awards, so.
Okay.
Training limit.
Yes. You
Teach me how to.
teach me how to ride the bus. Huh?
10 times.
Kim, I just had a follow-up question to what you're saying. So you're saying that basically the way the evaluation is constructed, it may inherently disadvantage score-wise a program, for example, I'm taking this out of the air, maybe Alpine is a jurisdiction where the inherent nature of it, people are more spread out or whatever, cost effectiveness would inherently just look worse, and some of the economic factors would just make it look worse on the scoring system, yet sort of from a more subjective point of view, you perhaps want to make sure that you're delivering a service to a more remote geographic area.
Yeah,
The numbers are off. So is that kind of what you're saying, that the current construction of the form, or maybe you have an answer?
I can answer that. So cost effectiveness is, there's 2 places in the criteria where cost effectiveness is being considered, and there's a subjective component and an objective one. So while they might objectively score low for a high cost per trip, their subjective score could be, they have an opportunity to justify their cost per trip. So for example, we do have a applicant, and they're actually the first non-funded project, Mountain Health Community Center. They serve predominantly Campo, and so they have a rural setting and have a higher cost per trip just based on how many miles they are taking seniors into, El Cajon and other areas to receive medical care. They have been successful in the past, they just weren't this time. But so we have this subjective and objective criteria to kind of balance that kind of narrative and play to kind of the need and whether or not they're serving the need despite having a high cost per trip.
Gotcha. Has anybody sort of drawn a map as to the range of service to see if there are major holes that, to your point, Kim, that whether it's the scoring itself or some other factor is not, getting those services into certain areas?
Yeah, I don't know if we've gone, do we have a geographical coverage now of the projects that we've funded?
Yeah, we're actually working on that currently. Just, anecdotally, having looked at it, there aren't any holes in terms of the urbanized area. There might be some, lack of coverage in the unurbanized, the rural areas.
Gotcha.
Mine is linked to innovation as well, more specifically on the alternative fuel vehicles or clean air vehicles. The upper ones average 8.5 further out of 10 points for innovation. The lower ones are in the 6s and stuff, but does that mean a lot of people are using alternative fuel, or is alternative fuel even a factor in any of these applications? I'm just curious if it's widely used or not at all, or?
Yeah. So a couple different ways to address that question. There isn't a question about alternative fuels specifically, but there is a question in the application and corresponding in the criteria about environmental sustainability, and it's kind of linked to innovation as well. And so the applicants have an opportunity to list and describe all of the efforts that they're doing, which could include alternative fuel use. And so it's really up to the applicants to provide enough information to the evaluators to receive points on that application. Conversely, a lot of these applicants are volunteer drivers, volunteer driver programs, so they are using volunteer drivers, which is efficient in a cost sort of viewpoint. But in terms of alternative fuels, I would guess that they're not using alternative fuels.
You say volunteer drivers using their own vehicles?
Yes. Yeah. I know there were no capital grants that were funded in this program, so that's kind of where we might see some of those responses of alternative fuels for their fleet and stuff like that. But for the most part, yeah, I would have to pull up the applications to see which ones are using alternative fuels, but I have seen that as a response for several of our providers. So. Yeah.
Any other questions for Audrey? Thank you.
I do have a question. To the extent that these agencies are using, I don't know what constitutes private vehicles and everything, to what extent do you have any interest or concern in liability of me using my car, driving these seniors around, partially being funded by Transnet dollars, if I'm not properly insured and such? Is there an issue there that's been addressed?
There is no issue. To the best of my knowledge, there's no issue. There's written into the contract standard insurance requirements in terms of how much coverage there is, and then Sandag is additionally insured.
That is part of the contract?
It's part of the grant agreement, correct.
Thanks. So then item number 7 is the Italk annual operating budget.
So every February, we bring to you draft proposed budget for your review and recommendation for the board's approval. You also review your budget status every quarter, as you know. The ordinance states that all the costs for administering the Italk activities are to be paid from Transnet sales tax proceeds, and the funds made available to Italk are not to exceed $250,000 after an adjustment for inflation each year. Funds that are not used in one fiscal year are to carry forward to the next year, especially in the years when expenses may exceed $250,000, such as will be the case in fiscal year 2018 when you conduct your next performance audit. Attachment 1 of your report shows the proposed Italk budget for FY18. It shows that the expected allocation for Italk is anticipated to be about $395,000, with expenses slightly over that at about $401,000. It also shows the projected carryover funding from prior years that would be needed in order to cover those expenses at about $6,000. And that would result in about $79,000 left at the end of fiscal year 2018 that would be available for FY19 Italk expenses. Today you could take action to go ahead and recommend that the board approve this FY18 proposed budget, or you could have us staff bring it back at the March meeting if you needed to make any changes. And the overall work program and budget is scheduled to be submitted for approval by the board as part of the draft Sandag program budget at the May 2017 board meeting. Yes.
My question is this: what percentage of increase have we seen from these contractors that we use to do our studies every so many years?
Yeah, it's usually about 3%.
And will this budget allow for a 3% increase? Okay.
I really struggle with comprehending the accounting presentation here. So a year ago, we decided not to allocate ourselves any budget this year, and it says we had 127 carryover. What is the number down below? Here it talks about other funds available, but total of 85,000. How does that relate to the carryover of 127?
I'm going to ask Lisa to help me with that as well, but there's carryover that's budgeted in years that you forego your allocation, for example. You have carryover that you budget in order to cover the expenses that you know you're going to have that fiscal year, but you have other carryover funds that are available to you that are not budgeted. So the ones down at the bottom are the unbudgeted
127
ones.
is what we thought we would need. So
It's
we
what
took
you-
that out of the reserve pool,
Yeah.
and we had yet another 85 still available. Okay, then my
That-
next question
That
is,
is correct.
this actual column, is that just a 6-month actual, or is that a projection for the full 12 months?
So that's the actual through December.
So
Right.
as of today, what's our projection for what our status will be at the end of this year?
Well, okay, so unless the Italk has a reason for a consultant, that will be unspent. There's a little bit of mileage that's usually used, and I'm not sure if there's going to be any advertising this year. And the audit is usually a little remaining. So what is that? That'd be maybe 25 remaining, I'd say.
So in ballpark, of the 127 we set for ourselves, we'll spend maybe 100 of that, leaving 25, 27 left over.
Yeah.
So we got maybe 25, and we got this 85 down the bottom. So that's 110. So we start next year with what we should have per the ordinance allocation, the 394 plus 110 available. We got, whatever that is, 504 total funds.
Yeah, so what we do is when we do the projections, we're not going to assume that there is a remainder for the current year, right? So we
Forget that
we
25.
put that aside. So we
Okay.
just say there's the 85 plus the 395. And so of the 85, we're going to take 6 and apply that to 18.
Okay, so the 6 is an arbitrary amount taken from the 85.
To balance
Get to a
out.
4, and now I get it,
Yeah.
okay, okay. All right, come on.
Don't give up your private job.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
I think that Ariana said that we could look at the fiscal 2019 also at this time. Did I understand
no.
you say that? I think
Yeah.
it's premature.
Yeah, just FY18 is the action for.
I think it's premature to even look at 2018 at this point.
We do
Well, we kind of
definitely
need
need an action on
You need to
FY18.
know.
We do because the board approves the budget, the overall budget, and this is part
So you
of
want
that.
us to look at 2018?
Yes, definitely, because that starts this July
Would it be
1.
inappropriate, since we have the huge expenditure for the triennial plus the annual, would it be appropriate for us to say we want to leave it at the 394,972 as budgeted?
Yes.
And then if we don't spend it, and we hope we don't, we would just have larger carryover. But would that be?
Yes, so 401,000 is what we're projecting you'll need for
Yes.
fiscal year 18.
Because of the
Yes.
two big audits.
Correct.
And you say that the board needs to know what our feelings are at this time.
Yes, the ordinance specifies that 90 days before the fiscal year begins, Italk is to submit to the board for their consideration and approval.
Well, somebody could make a motion, but I believe, okay, I'll make the motion that we take the full allocation. We budget for the full allocation at this time because of the two audits. that we have.
Plus the 6,000, so your motion covers the 401.
I need a motion to cover 401, of which 6,000 will come from the carryover.
I second.
Because so now from a discussion standpoint, I just want to go back to the 100,000 that, your revised accounting uncovers. And maybe I missed something in the prior conversation, but it seems that in fact, we should have that 100,000.
Not 100, it's 79, because they're not willing to give us the 25 in round numbers yet, because we don't know the next 6 months. So for conservative, that's the 79
Okay.
down.
All right, so it would be more conservative then. Okay, let's call it then the 71. Well, I don't know, maybe it's not prudent to approve an allocation on the assumption that the odds are that it will be that 70-something thousand. So in theory, we're not really making a huge stretch to say the allocation arguably should be the the required expense amount less the 70, because the 70, otherwise that number just kind of keeps going, right?
We use it in FY19, right?
Right.
That raises a question in my mind, going from history. I thought in the past, when we have foregone our entire year's budget, I thought that money doesn't go into reserve. It gets redistributed per the ordinance.
It sure
Right.
does, yes.
If that's true, then this 79 is just the variations in our estimates that we
They're
didn't
just
forego.
built up over time, interest earned.
But to Stuart's point, if we don't need all this money, ultimately, in the following
That
year.
balance just grows.
Yeah.
Well, no, it doesn't. When we forego an annual budget, purposely forego the whole annual budget, that money goes and gets used.
Yep.
It might be a year or
Well,
a year
correct me if
back.
I'm wrong though, but the 70, that's like real money that
Oh.
will,
Yes.
I don't know if it's in a segregated account or how to characterize that, but that's a balance that will then just continue to grow.
Yes, this is a cash balance.
Right.
It is, right. So we do track every program and then recipients within the programs to see what the current balance is at all times. So with the Italk, there have been years where you haven't foregone and you've taken the annual allocation. And just like this year, there may be an unspent portion. That portion stays with the Italk.
Right.
And so that's exactly what this carry forward is this unspent, unbudgeted balance. It's a carry forward of unspent funds from past plus interest earned.
But it stays with
It
ITOC
stays with
until such time as we forego the next year's budget and we
Correct.
consume that in lieu of.
Yes.
So that will get consumed. Take, for example, it builds to 120,000. Next year, the
Right.
recommended budget's 120,000. We forego our 300,
Right.
and we consume the 120 and drive it down the street.
And that's what happened in
Okay.
fiscal year 17,
So in effect,
that
right, okay,
unspent
so in
balance
effect,
is
we'll
so large.
use, if we forego the allocation in fiscal 19, we would use that balance to cover.
Correct. Or you could do a partial, you could take a partial allocation to spend down your,
We can, it's our choice.
It's sort of 6 of one, half dozen of the other as to
Right.
whether you take the 70 this year versus next year.
Right.
But if people somehow feel more comfortable because we have all the expenses for 2018 to take the full allocation.
Well, there also might be some argument to have a little, it's not extreme and it's a buffer or a
Yeah.
reserve. We don't know, we don't have a proposal for the audits, we don't know, some variance might occur, so,
Well, compared to certainly the Transnet program budget.
It's significant.
But as a percentage of our budget, it's it's like 20%, close to 20% of our budget, so it's not insignificant.
But to Kai's point, it's a contingency. Take for a completely hypothetical example, we decided we wanted to have an audit of the revenue estimating processes. That would be an unplanned budget number that we might want to, assuming we have the authority to do such thing, we would draw on our reserve.
All right, well, we've had a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
A question to Ariana. The timing of the process to get the consultant on the performance audit, tell us about that. And then as far as the budget, when you put the RFQ out and all that, they're all aware of sort of where the budget is on?
It will
So
be
is
stated
that part
as
of
an
their
up to.
presentation where, I can't remember the
we
selection
can look
process.
up our agenda online too.
It's how the selection process worked last time,
Yes.
because we used the same consultant
Yes.
the last time, so this time there's going to be a new one. They're going to apply it again. So I'm just curious how that works, and they know our budget and how that works.
The RFP will typically show an up to amount, and it'll show not only the FY18 audit, but the option that the Italk chose to include for the following audit, the FY 2021 audit. And so from that standpoint, there would be an up to, not to exceed amount included in the RFP. And in terms of timing, I think we anticipate bringing, the subcommittee together in the next month or so, or 2 months, and then probably in April is when the full committee would review recommendations, April, May.
And then the last consultant we had, they spent a little more at the end than you and I. The expenses they had were a little higher than that. How did that work and that's reflected in here, the ability to pay for that? it does go over.
So since it's an up to amount, right, I believe they spent more time and effort on the deliverables, the
They
scope.
took care of the cost.
But they absorbed that, yes, because we were holding them to what we had agreed to.
Okay, any further discussion or questions? Okay, then-
Did we get a vote?
No, we haven't voted yet.
About to.
Okay.
So then all in favor?
Wait, could we just clarify what we're voting on since we had so much discussion? I'm serious.
Okay, no, I think the motion was to accept the full allocation.
And we're accepting these numbers for our budget. for next
Okay,
year.
that's perfect.
Full allocation plus a $6,337 carryover.
Okay, so all in favor? All righty. Lisa is up next with the quarterly financial report.
And so this is the information through December 31st. As in the past, I'm just going to jump right on into the attachments.
Before you do,
Yes.
would you repeat the DCR?
Yes, that, excuse me, it is 2.64 times. This is the debt service coverage, which means, and this would be in the discussion section on the first page of the report, that large paragraph kind of in the center. And so for every dollar of debt service, we receive $2.64 in sales tax. So that's just showing that we have enough sales tax coming in to cover our debt service costs. And it's covered a little bit more in Andre's item later in the agenda.
We had asked for that report a couple, 2-3 years ago, 4 years ago, whatever. The debt coverage ratio, or you call it debt service ratio, just debt service coverage. It's an important number.
It is, and we do provide that every quarter in this agenda item. It is one of the required items to present to you.
Yes. Thank you. Lisa.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to go into attachment 1. So this is kind of our overall snapshot of where we were at the end of December. And it's broken down by program, Transnet program. For the local street and roads, we have it broken out by the local jurisdiction. On the second page, we also have the services broken out by MTS and NCTD. So on the left side, we're showing your allocations, which would be your sales tax received this quarter, fiscal year to date, and cumulative program to date. We have our other income, the other revenues coming in, and that would be if there were leftover Transnet 1 funds that were not programmed under the old ordinance, they carried forward. Interest earnings on the funds held. Also that RS swap is in there, that was back in 2009 or 10, to show us what our total allocations or the total revenues are through December 31st. Then on the right side, we have our disbursements. So our program disbursements are also broken out, quarter, fiscal year, and program to date cumulative. And those are going to be the payments that we've made to the local jurisdictions or for other programs. Some payments to SANDAG for the grant programs. They pay the payees directly. It's also going to include program costs, mostly bank fees. And then we have our debt service, so you can see the programs and the jurisdictions that are in the debt service program. So you can see how those payments have been made thus far to show our total disbursements through December. And then on page 2, any questions on that section? Then on page 2, we have our commercial paper activity in the center. On the left, we're just kind of giving you a snapshot of the programs or jurisdictions that have been in the program. They may not be currently, but they have been at one time, so we're just giving you an idea of the use of the program over time. And on the right is the current activity. So we have the $75 million program, and you can see where we started and the current activity. So we currently have $48 million available to be used for programs, or if other jurisdictions wish to enter into the program. We did add the city of Oceanside. We have an agreement with them. They came before you, it may have been last April or May, for a $5 million contract. They've not begun to draw against that yet, but we do expect that to happen this fiscal year. So we wanted to give them a placeholder. And then we have our other activity in the bottom section, and this is for the ordinance. It was expected that the major quarter EMP program would advance fund the land acquisitions, which occurred, and that's done through the debt program. And so their portion of the debt repayment was actually going to be in excess of sales tax coming in for that program. So they're borrowing against the major corridor to cover their costs. We're tracking that because it must be repaid. So this is the current standing. So it's $13 million that has been borrowed to date. And that balance goes up and down through the year as the sales tax come in and as the debt service is covered. Any questions on that one? About Stuart thinking.
Yeah, I guess the question that I was perceived, I was thinking about is there any service charge in effect for entering into the program? I'm thinking of sort of NCTD is, in effect, we've reserved $28 million for their use, of which they've only used $1 million. And it's not an issue because we don't have excess demand relative to the amount of availability, but I'm just curious if there's any...
That's actually the opposite. So there's 28 that they remaining of what they initially borrowed, and they paid down 1.3. So their outstanding balance is 26.7.
Okay, so they actually have drawn down the 20.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry. Okay.
And they pay their fees and costs.
Directly.
Right. No, I was just thinking in terms of if money's been allocated for them that they haven't fully drawn down. But my questions are relevant based on the fact that I was reading the numbers. Yeah.
Oceanside would be an example of that.
Yeah, if there's money that's committed, they haven't drawn yet.
If someone else wanted 5, it's not available.
Yeah. Is there an undrawn balance kind of fee or anything of that nature, to Dick's point?
Well, there are fees for the program itself overall, and those are split according to the outstanding balances for those that are in the program. So yes, there is, for up to $75 million, we're charged against the whole program, regardless of whether it's been drawn. So yes.
Oceanside is paying their share of the fees, even though...
Not yet, because they don't, not until they start drawing it. So that is, it's charged at the point that they start drawing, and then it depends on, it's constantly fluctuating, depending on, you know, at the beginning of the year, NCTD was at 28 million, now they're at 27.
Right, but to the extent Oceanside, in effect, says reserve $5 million for us, you actually reserve it. But if they don't use it, it's not available. That $5 million won't be available to others. But sort of where's the discipline in the system?
Yeah, we haven't come to the point where it's been, we've had so much demand at one point that we've had to increase the whole program.
Right.
We do have authorization to increase the program to $100 million,
Okay.
but we found that 75 seems to be a good number. In between bonds, we sometimes will use the commercial paper for our major quarter and major quarter EMP programs as gap funding, and then when the new bond is issued, then we pay it down. But other than that, the local jurisdictions, we just haven't had that kind of, use, the full,
Right, so
on an ongoing basis.
Excess demand relative to capacity hasn't been an issue. So
Right, and if it did, if we got to that point, we'd sit back and kind of think about, how are we going to apply this now, and do we have to, rethink the program, increase the program perhaps?
Well,
Okay.
from time to time, the board has revisited the size of the program. I believe when we first did it, it was a much larger.
It's 335.
Yeah, program, and it's gone down. And we do have authorization beyond the 75, but we try to be prudent in terms of how much because we do pay fees on, the client credit, right? We pay fees on that, so we're trying to be prudent on what do we need for cash flow purposes, what can we offer to our member agencies.
Yeah, I guess it just seems a curiosity to the extent that there's fees paid at the Sandag level, the fee isn't pushed down to the jurisdiction until they actually draw down the
Until they
funds.
actually draw.
Okay, thank you.
And then on the last page of this attachment is our bond activity. So currently, we have proceeds outstanding on the 2014 and the 2016 bonds. The 2014 bonds would be for the city of Del Mar and the city of Santee. The balances are actually quite low right now, and we're thinking that either by the end of the fiscal year or towards the beginning of the next fiscal year, this bond will be fully spent down. And the 2016 bond, of course, we issued this fiscal year, and we spent down quite a bit, but there still is a balance that we're using on an ongoing basis. Are there any questions on? Yep. I'm going to reserve attachment 2 for the end. So we can go on to attachment 3, which is our sales tax revenues. So here we're showing, we have 2 sections. The upper section is going to show the annual, the estimates for each of the years, and the actuals. And of course for FY17 it only goes through December. And then in the lower section we're breaking down fiscal year 17 by month, so you can see how it's been collected against what it was estimated. And this is the current estimate. We'll adjust this once if the board were to approve the revenue adjustment. Any questions on this? Yeah.
Okay, looking at fiscal year 2017,
Yes.
I know that since December is usually a higher increase in sales tax revenues, do you feel we can live within our estimate, or will we find out the actuals are lower by, June 30th of 18?
Can you repeat the?
Okay, look at,
December's on there, isn't it?
no, but the fiscal year goes through June 30th of 18th, and so what I'm wondering, since December is a higher tax revenue month, we have, okay, good.
We get the receipts for December come after December, even though the quarter includes December.
Oh, so in other words, we haven't received that yet?
The true-up.
So typically, the number that you see in December is what we collected 3 months earlier. So the cleanup month for December will happen in March. So
Okay, then that's good. That's
sales,
okay, no problem.
We anticipate a pretty good number based on retail sales, and we'll see that in March.
When I looked at your footnote, it says reflects actual year-to-date cash receipts through December of 2016, and I thought it might be the same, but we're always lagging behind. Okay, I get you. No problem, guys. It's just understanding what they're doing.
So is the number, so this is in effect a cash flow number as opposed to like an accrual?
Right,
number.
exactly.
Is the number actually known but has not yet been received, or is it just not known at this point?
Right, it's not known at this
Gotcha.
point. We actually are given the number about a week before the actual receipt
I see.
for each month.
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay, so attachment, are we good on this one? Yeah, okay. So attachment 4, I mean, unless there are any questions, we've already covered this with Ariana's item.
Yeah, we're good with this, right? I thought we just
Okay.
discussed it to death, so.
Okay, great. Attachment 5, so this is looking at the maintenance portion of the local street and roads, cumulative numbers. We have to ensure that we are not paying the local agencies more than 30% for the maintenance projects at all times. So that's what this spreadsheet is going to show you. We have column A, you can see the funds collected, Transnet funds collected through December. B is going to be the other funds, that's going to be the interest earned, any Transnet 1 carried over, the ARA funds, to provide us with our total revenues collected cumulatively. The expenditures in column D are going to be mostly the payments to the local jurisdictions for their projects that have been programmed. There's also going to be some program costs included in there. And then we come to column E. So these are the balances kept. So this would be the available balance to them should we have enough cash on hand for program projects or other program costs. And then column F are the cash balances. Okay, so in column F, for those jurisdictions that have an amount in bold, so the first one would be Coronado, and that's $1,188,000. So that number that's in bold is less, that's column F, than what's in column E, right? So the balance in column E is 1.4 million. But they have been spending more of their Transnet funds on congestion relief projects because they can spend in excess of 70%. So that brings the cash balance down. So when they request payment on their program projects for maintenance, we can pay them up to the balance, but also whatever cash we have on hand, right? We have to look at both. So the most that we could pay them would be about 1.2 million for maintenance project, 1.2 million.
Isn't there a catch-up procedure? If I use more than 70%, can't I use more than 30% in subsequent years to get back to even keel?
It's cumulative, right. The 30% is cumulative, so exactly. So this year they could use all of their funds on maintenance projects as long as they're cumulatively within 30%. Move on.
This process here monitors very closely the 70-30 split. Is my memory correct that there was also a mandate that for an entity to get the 30%, they have to show that they have spent their historic amount of their own funds for maintenance?
The maintenance effort, right, and that's checked through the audit.
Through our annual audit.
Right, and it's not just for that's just for their total Transnet, the whole program.
We look at that annually through the audit.
Yes. So moving on to the next attachment. So now we're looking at the grant programs that we have. We have our active transportation, also known as the bicycle pedestrian. We have our smart road, the local EMP program, and the senior mini grant. So we're showing you some activity here. We have the total revenue received through December. Some of the funds are used for the grants, and some are used for non-grant. So we have some of the bike ped funds are used for regional projects. So we're calling those amounts out, and then the same thing with the local EMP. Some of the funds are used for regional, not awarded to grantees. That would be the column B. So then we have our column D is going to be what has been paid to the grantees thus far, and we're also providing you with the unspent grant commitment to date, which is going to be your column. Yes. Okay. So now we can go back to attachment 2, which is our local street and road balances.
So is there, just
Yes.
On the unspent grant commitments, refresh our memories, are the awardees committed to spend the monies within a particular period of time, and if not, have to come back for?
It depends, I'm not, I believe there are.
Yeah, there is a time frame.
Right.
And you've seen some amendments.
Coming forward, asking for
And
extensions.
then we use the watch list, which you
Right.
see on a quarterly basis as well, both on cost and schedule.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought, okay.
Okay, so on attachment 2, local street and road balances. Okay, so on our left side, we're showing you what the allocations are. Column A are going to be the cumulative revenues received through December. And then for column B, based on the current Transnet revenue estimate, we're showing you what the additional collection is expected to be, but net of debt service, because of course we have to, for those that are in our debt service programs, we have to set those funds aside for their debt service costs. And then we're showing you what's been dispersed, what's been paid out either to the local agencies or for the program costs. And then column D is funds held at Sandak through December, or at December 31st. And then we also have the local agencies provided what their current balances are at December 31st. So then we're going to show you what our cash balances are. And the original threshold was at 60%, which is column G. And so you can see who met that criteria and those that are below that criteria. And and that's just based on the cash balances. Then we're moving on to bringing in the programming. So now we're looking at what the plan is for the rest of the year, right? So we're looking at what's remaining in their programming for the year to show that if they, in fact, were to spend down all that they have programmed, then we would come up with our column E, which would be the balances at the end of the fiscal year. And that's what we apply the new threshold, the 75% threshold against. And we had one jurisdiction that just missed it, the city of Carlsbad. And when we contacted them, nothing had changed since the last letter that they provided. So it's the same letter that was provided in November. And they said, the projects have been moving forward, but all of the reasons are pretty much the same. Those that are in column J, those that are bold, are going to be in excess of 100% because they debt advanced some of their projects, borrowed against commercial paper or one of the bond programs. Are there any questions on this one? Yes.
I always look at San Diego, city of San Diego. The column J, this says that they're going to, it's projected to be spent 98.9%. Is that of the annual allocation or the cumulative allocation going all the way back?
Yes, so that's cumulative. That's taking
what I
into
thought.
account the funds that we're holding, they're holding, and then what they're saying, what they have programmed. If they were to spend everything that they have programmed, then that's where they would be.
Well, as I calculate that, they've been carrying over $50 million. So this means that they would expect to be spending almost all of that $50 million between now and the end of the year. Is that correct? Well, first of all, they've been very good in coming before us and trying to explain what they're doing.
Right.
And their motives are good. But if I read this, this means they should have a very small carryover this year.
Right, and that's, you know, if everything were to go as expected, they didn't change funding sources, and they were to use the funds as programmed, then absolutely, that is where they would end.
All
But,
right.
and we'll see where it does end.
Thank you. And the program, of course, it is, let's see, that's not necessarily an expenditure.
Correct.
But it should be a commitment. Is that correct? Or an obligation, whatever you wish to call it.
Well, it's an intended amount, and they.
Well, I
on the
consider
budget
it a
side-
commitment or an obligation to be,
Yeah,
to be a contract that they sign for the future.
Yeah, it's part of their annual budget that they approve, and it's funds that they expect to draw down from us in the fiscal year. Whether they spend it on their end in the same fiscal year is up to them, but they program based on when they're going to draw it from Sandak,
From us.
on when we're going to pay them.
All right. Well, good. I wish them well.
Is there any other questions?
Lisa?
We don't have any rules for the agencies. They can draw down from you what's been allocated at their will. And they can sit on it forever.
Okay, so first of all, it has to be programmed, right? So we know that. But then you have to remember, and you'll see this next month when we bring the draft audits, the auditors are here. We also have that 30%, we call it the 30% fund balance rule. It's really a balance on their side. So if they are holding at year end more than 30% of their annual allocations, then we can't pay them, even if they have it programmed. They have to get below that 30%.
You won't give them any more until they
You
work
won't,
off.
right, they have to certify that they are below that
They
amount.
just try to gun deck the thing by drawing it down, saying
Right.
they have a program and not spending.
Right, and as long as it's programmed, they can draw it down, but if they exceed that 30%,
The only way to
then,
keep on.
yeah.
What's the other 30% rule? There's a 70-30 rule.
Right.
A different 30.
Different 30.
Different 30%.
You like that 30 number.
Thanks, Lisa.
By the way, may I add one comment, general, quick comment? I was talking with Lisa earlier about the debt coverage ratio. I like that. I'd like to know what that is. And she did comment that we are going out for more loans, particularly with TIFIA, and that will adjust this in the future. So just keep that in mind. Does that make sense to what we're saying? That was just an informal conversation. Didn't break the Brown Act. Nobody was around.
Nobody was around.
So the DCR may be going down, and someday we'll hear about that from Ray and his group. All right, thank you.
So next is item 9 with Ray and Dawn to talk about the transit program revenue revision and estimates for fiscal 18 through 22.
All right, good morning. This time every year Sandak provides to the transit agencies and to the local agencies the upcoming fiscal year apportionment and forecasted revenues for the next 5 years, which are fiscal year 2018 through fiscal year 2022. This includes the Transnet transit revenues and also Federal Transit Authority, State Transit Assistance, and Transportation Development Act funding. For purposes of today, we're only discussing the Transnet program revenues, including those available for transit system improvements. The table is included in attachment to your report.
It's actually the sheet that you'll be at your desk.
This year's forecast also proposes a revision to the fiscal year 2017 estimate that reflects lower than anticipated receipts in the first half of fiscal year 17, reducing the total program amount from approximately $288 million to approximately $202.7 million, with an overall impact over the subsequent 5-year period of approximately $29.5 million. The revised fiscal year 2017 estimate reflects a growth rate of 2.62% above fiscal year 2016 revenues that were received. And the fiscal year 2018 through fiscal year 22 growth rates range from approximately 3.3 to 4.2%. These are consistent with the proposed growth rates presented to this committee in last month's program and revenue forecast update that you received. These revenue estimates will be taken to the Transportation Committee on February 17th for recommendation into the Board of Directors on February 24th for approval. And Ray and I are here to answer any questions you have.
I know that you got some bad press. So my question is this: how comfortable do you feel with your revised estimates, not only for fiscal year 2017, 18, and so forth, but going on?
So I'm glad you asked that question because I knew that was going to come up at some point.
And I did it nicely.
You did it very nicely. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Our old forecast methodology that we've historically been using relied on our DEFM, or Demographic Economic Forecasting Model. There was a series in there that was called Taxable Retail Sales that it was generated for the whole region as part of the forecast. And the model that we've been using took those numbers and it calculated essentially the amount of sales tax that we would generate from that. And that's the one that was proven to be a little bit aggressive. Last month when I talked to you, we had devised a new forecast methodology, and this new forecast methodology doesn't rely on any of the Sandag DEFM numbers other than population. So what we did is we took 3 independent forecasts, nationally recognized sources, and we took an average of those forecasts. So instead of building it from top down, okay, what we did is we built it from bottom up. So we took a look at what actual sales tax revenues were per capita, because now we have actual numbers, right? I know for a fact that last year we collected $83.77 per person who lived in San Diego County. So understanding now what we were actually collecting, we built it upwards by taking 3 different factors. One, we took a look at increases in population, because for the additional people that we would end up being able to, or that would move to San Diego, we'd be collecting approximately 83.77 for each one of them, right? We took a look at inflation rates, and then we took a look at projected growth in real income, so people making higher salaries in the future, translating into more taxable retail sales. So that's what our new formula is. So it's a bottom-up approach that takes a look at what each resident would contribute versus looking at it from a regional perspective and looking down, if that makes sense. This forecast is more conservative than the other one because of the way that it's calculated. It doesn't take into account economic output, for instance. It's looking at what people are actually paying. So I'm more comfortable with this forecast for those reasons. The other thing is Series 13 was developed about 4 years ago. So there were assumptions in the model that thought that we were going to come out of the last recession like we did every other recession, which is with a 4 or 5% growth rate in the first couple of years. And so there was a steeper slope coming out of the recession. What proved to happen after the Great Recession is that we've had very low economic growth essentially for the last 10 years. And so the model starts to drift, if that makes sense. So Series 13 is forecasting here, and because we have never caught up, we're actually a little bit lower in terms of the line. And so by using this model, which now updates it to 2016 data, I think it's also more accurate because it takes into account what's happened in the last 4 years in the local economy, which is very low growth rates. We also have lower rates of inflation that we've experienced in the last couple of years that are built into this model also. So those factors give us a much more conservative approach. The other thing is, in terms of the calibration that we do with the model, there's a short-term component, there's the long-term component. So what I've been speaking about is the long-term model. We use the economic drivers from these 3 independent sources. For our short-term model, we're looking at information that we get from Muni Services, which includes information on forecasts that they do for automobile sales, for gas prices, for things that really impact our local sales tax revenues in the next couple of years. We use those forecasts to help calibrate what may happen in the next 1 or 2 years. So this forecast is more conservative than the other forecast. It's built using a different methodology than the other forecast, and it has newer data in it than the other forecasts. So my personal feeling is that this forecast is more in alignment with what we might be able to see in the future.
Okay, I have a follow-up. I know that there are many economists working for Sandag, and they have differing viewpoints. What I'm concerned about as a member of this committee is, how do you reconcile your differences? Because the bottom line is, we've got to have enough money to cover the projects that supposedly are going to be built before this money runs out. So what do you do with the disconnect from different people's philosophies and make it all work so there's enough money?
Well, so there's enough money. I think, well, so we're going to collect as much revenue as we're going to collect based upon what the economy does. So really the question is what methodology we use for developing these models. And in that particular case, the economists can sit down and come to a consensus on which model they want to use, and then I think document that and bring it to Italk and to the board and say this is, and be very transparent about how we're actually calculating the revenues. One of the reasons I went into the components of this is so that you understand how we did this particular forecast. So, you know, when you're comparing the other two forecasts, and there were other issues there. You can forecast taxable retail sales in lots of different ways. One way is the way that we have historically done it, which is to use total regional taxable retail sales, so how much we sell regionally, and then figure out 0.005% of that would be the tax that we collect. So it's a valid, the methodology is valid. The question is whether or not the data that was going into it, driving that number, was accurate. Does that make sense? So I think, I mean, in the case of these models, we need to sit down and we need to come into an agreement in terms of which one we're going to use. And to tell you the truth, you know, we're in agreement with the fact that these models will give us the type of results that we need. All models are susceptible to error, right? I don't know what the future is going to hold. I mean, what you're asking me to do is to forecast sales tax revenue through potentially 8 years of Trump presidency, which I do not know what he will do or be able to do, or if he does, he's only here for 4 years. But any of the things that policies that he puts in place could potentially affect us, right? So if there's a tariff, for instance, and now all of a sudden we have it impacts trade with Mexico. You know, these things aren't in the forecast. What I'm looking at is trying to come up with a number for the plan of finance so that we can budget against it. And the most conservative way to do that, and I think that other economists would agree with me, is to take historically what we know and then forecast from that point out, and not to take into account any of the potential things that may happen in the future. In the future, I expect to be doing forecasting a little bit differently, where we start to forecast ranges instead of points, and we would have an optimistic forecast, a most likely forecast, and a conservative forecast, and those forecasts would be based on different scenarios. And I'd like to be as transparent to Italk as I can, so with those forecasts, what I would say is our low forecast assumes, I'm making this up now, for instance, that sometime in the next 40 years we have another recession that is as big as the Great Recession that we had, and we recover from it the same way. The optimistic one might look at it and say, we create much more high-paying jobs in this particular scenario, and that increases sales tax revenue. So I would give you, instead of a point forecast, a range of possibilities, and then we can discuss the assumptions that go into the model. And if there need to be changes, we can always change those and rerun the model. But that way we get away from trying to forecast an exact number. It's incredibly difficult, especially with sales tax revenue, to be forecasting even out 1 or 2 quarters in terms of what's going to happen with things like gas prices and retail sales, because there's so much sensitivity in that. So I think as an economics team, we would sit down, we will agree on the methodology, we'll agree on how we're going to be presenting the data in an easy to digest and transparent manner, and we'll go forward and do the forecast that way.
Well, you know, a comment I have, and I don't know if there's much of a question in here, but it's, you know, there seems to be a lot of focus on the sales tax projection, and there's a lot, you know, it's really, like any modeling, in my view, difficult to predict the future, and you do the best you can to adjust as we go. But that's only probably, I mean, 80% of the funding picture is outside of this source. It's the matching funds, and that's, or where other money will come from, and that's equally or harder to predict, and what construction costs will do, and that's equally harder to predict. So it seems to me kind of, I don't know, there's just a lot of real, some of the media stuff that's happened and things, it seems disproportionate when you focus on this one component, and it's maybe only 20% of the funding picture for the project.
But this is a very critical point right there, because ultimately I'd like to pursue 3 different inquiries. This is one of them, so we can address it here. I think we ought to make sure we all agree with what Kai just said as a committee and recognize that this undue influence on some estimate of sales tax revenue for the next 40 years is one piece and a relatively small piece of the total equation of how many projects get built in our community.
But what I think that I don't know if I disagree with you, but I want to emphasize is when, for example, Caltrans, we went with a lot of Italk money, in other words, Transnet money, because it provided that necessary match we needed. Sure, it might have only been 8 or 9 cents on every dollar, but without that 8 or 9 cents, we didn't have the dollar. So, okay, it's small, but the nice thing about this kind of money is there aren't that many rules. Every other source of money you get has like 5 pages of rules, and I'm probably not giving you enough credit for how many pages there really are. So the Transnet dollars are extremely important on getting something built.
Agreed there. And my point is that focusing on being perfectly accurate with those numbers is disproportionate to the big picture. I completely agree with the importance of it. I agree.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's just that because we just had this Proposition A or whatever it was, or Measure A, and now you read in the paper this morning that people think that Sandag has done something so dishonest and everything else. So what I am thinking is, gee, with such bad press, how do you ever get another, Transnet measure to be passed? Because the bond of trust gets wiped out. How do you build that up? Maybe that's why it's important.
Well, from
Yeah. No, but I mean,
maybe just to speak to Carolyn's point, from a modeling perspective, beyond the sales tax revenue, is there any ability to actually model the matching funds, or do we basically say historically it's been about 3 times, and so we're just going to use the 3 going forward?
So I'll take that one. So the forecasting that we do for the matching funds, so these are the state and the federal funds. So that's part of the long-range regional transportation plan. And so as part of that exercise, we look at each individual. There's about 30 different fund sources in the
30, did you say?
About 30.
Yeah.
About 2/3 of those are the state and the federal funds. So we look at past historical. How have those grown over time? Maybe some of these were one-time funds, and we can't assume that they will continue. But a good majority of them are revenue sources that are your formula types of funds. And so year after year, they may not grow exactly at the same pace every year. But if you look back 10, 15, 20 years, you can start to develop a pretty good trend line. So those are developed as part of the regional transportation plan to put together what's called the financially constrained plan. And that's a legally required plan that the feds ask of us. And the feds, Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration, they both review our assumptions. Caltrans also reviews our assumptions, just to make sure that they are what's called reasonably available. So in looking into the future, there's a certain, it's reasonable to assume that they will be available at a certain point in time, over time. And that's how we develop the estimates for the matching funds. So then we take those and then we compare them or add them to the revenue forecast from Transnet to develop our plan of finance.
Can I add something with regard to that? With regard to the 30 different fund sources. Matching and state and federal funds would also come in sort of two different pots. The formula funds are, roughly fairly stable. Over time, if you look at the federal transportation authorization, going back to IST, now we're on the FAST Act. They have grown over time, and so those are fairly stable funds with things like CMAQ, STP, Prudential Mitigation, and Air Quality, Surface Transportation Program. So those are stuff we could rely on and kind of predict out of whatever funding need there are. There's always sort of that stable source of formula funds. The other funds are discretionary funds. They include things like the Tiger program. They include, at the state level, Proposition 1B, for example, the $20 billion infrastructure bond that voters approved back statewide in 2006. Now, those obviously, by their very nature, are a little bit, we don't know exactly when those can happen. But it's not that we're assuming, hey, we're going to have another Prop 1 year, we're going to have specifically another economic stimulus. Some of our estimates look at, over time, there have been these sort of one-time infusions, so we make certain assumptions or reasonable assumptions that if I look out 40 years, every decade or so, we may be getting this additional sort of one-time infusion. So it does include some projections with regard to that as well. We don't believe they're unreasonable because they have over time, for long periods of time shown that. We're not necessarily saying, hey, we're going to get another economic stimulus act. We're saying there's some reasonable expectations that there will be some.
So the 3 times isn't just taken for granted. There's some reality testing at a more granular level on a regular basis. Sure.
When you look at the long-range plan, for example, Mid-Coast, right, arguably our biggest project, about a $2 billion project in rough terms. $1 million, half and half roughly, $1 million billion of federal funds. Well, looking forward in our long-range plan, we don't say, hey, I'm assuming we get $1 billion a year, but we do look at, hey, for all these transit projects in the long-range plan that we want to do, there's a reasonable assumption that every so many years that we would be able to get one of these full-funding grant agreements that would provide at least half the funds. So that goes into some of the thought process and some of the forecasts, if you will, going into the long-range plan, that also over the same time period is folded into the plan of finance.
If I may, Kim, what you just said, I think, and I agree fully with it and understand it, but I think it fully supports what Kai said. The vagaries around those assumptions you make and have to make in terms of matching funds far, far exceed the vagaries around the assumptions you make about the detailed sales tax revenue to be available here in our area. Ergo, all the attention that's been focused in the press on the possible variations in forecasts here pale in comparison to the potential variations that might exist around the assumptions you make about the matching.
And one of the things that we do, understanding that forecasting matching funds, there are so many different rules and regulations and so forth. So the regional transportation plan is updated every 4 years. So every 4 years, we take a fresh look at all of our assumptions. Where have we been over the past 4 years? Are there any new sources of funds that we need to include? Are there any others that we need to take out? So we look at all of these things and try to bring the latest, greatest set of assumptions for the next iteration of this long-term forecast.
So, question. So going forward, I know Lisa does this report on attachment 3 where the revenue comes in on the estimates and how it matches with the actuals. Going forward, and as far as this committee is concerned, is there a way, because you do the reports to us, was there a way to see sort of the potential impact of these numbers, the lowering numbers, the percentages of they're not hitting the mark, and how it would affect the overall projects that are going forward? I mean, we're getting these reports, but we're not hearing from about the potential impact of this, especially if the federal dollars and state dollars don't come in. What are these numbers in the long run how are they going to impact all of us and the projects promised to the voters? So how does that all play out?
That's not finance.
Right. So So as part of the plan of finance, I mean, that's what we do. So we look at what are the latest assumptions, latest forecasts for both matching funds and Transnet funds. And we look at the long term, but then I think more importantly, we look at what's the capacity to complete projects in the short term. And by short term, I mean, say, the next 5 to 7 years. Because the next 5 to 7 years is where the assumptions for additional revenues, Transnet, et cetera, are clearest. It's the nearest point in time. It's also where the cost estimates are clearest, because we have been working in a lot more detail on a lot of these projects. So the plan of finance also looks at the next 5 to 7 years, so that can inform the agency's capital budget. And we can also provide options for the board in terms of there's opportunity to advance projects, or maybe the economy is slowing down and we need to slow down on the program. So those are the kinds of things that we look at both in the short term and the long term to inform the board.
So during the plan of finance report, when is that given to the board?
It's at least on an annual basis, and so we're bringing that to this committee and to the board in the next couple of months.
And your report, these numbers are sort of reflected, the trends are all reflected in that report going forward.
Right.
Jonathan, you can ask.
You've covered my questions. Thank you very much.
But I pick up on Brad's point. Big picture-wise, Brad refers to the projects that have been promised to the public. As a broad estimate or judgment, what percentage of the cost of those projects promised to the public is coming from Transnet versus the matching funds in state and federal? Is it roughly still the 3-to-1 ratio?
Right. So if you look at the report that was presented to the board in December and to this committee last month, I think the estimate was that about for every Transnet dollar in the program, this is looking forward, we need about another $3.4 of other funds to pay for the entire program.
I mean, to Carolyn's point, the public, there should be some major effort pursued with the public to make them understand that for those projects to get completed, we are far more dependent on that 3.4 ratio than we are on the Transnet. We need the Transnet. If there's variation in that number, it pales in significance to this. So if we're worried about getting those projects done, we got to worry about state and federal funding far more than we got to worry about raised estimate of Transnet. I don't know how you get that point across, but it certainly hasn't come across in any of the newspaper.
You didn't read about the sanctuary city punishment?
I do have 2 other questions, Ray.
Yes, sir.
There's been a great deal of talk in the media, and we've even been quoted in relation to our responsibilities and such about variations in forecasts. Yet I haven't seen any quantification of the variance. And you guys have forecasts coming out for years. You've got short-term forecasts that we monitor every month. You got your 5-year, and then there's this constant thing about the total 40-year project. And we have the Prop A 40-year project projections. I gather the error that was discovered or asserted related to the original Transnet 40-year projection, the remainder of that 40-year projection. If I'm not right, correct me. What I'm looking for is, what's the difference in the total dollar difference between the Marnie and the Ray forecast?
Between the Marnie and the Ray forecast.
You get right to the point.
Ballpark. We've all numbered that there's this difference, a horrendous difference. No one's ever quantified it, at least that I've seen. What's the difference?
Yeah, and I could quantify that. I haven't quantified that exact thing, because here's what's it. There is a set. DEFM is a forecasting tool that we have here. Marty used one of the variables from there to create an estimate of sales tax revenue for Measure A, and that's the $18 billion. So you were talking about regional Transnet. I think that the controversy comes in is whether or not we're going to collect the $18 billion was the forecast that we were looking at, where we found the error. That was the is in Series 13, the model, the DEFA model. My forecast was completely different, and it was built for the plan of finance. It wasn't built looking at all the interactions of the San Diego economy. I'm looking at it differently. I certainly could compare the two for you. The dollars have to be corrected, because we use the year of expenditure dollars in the plan of finance, and we use I think it's 2015 dollars was in Measure A. So everything would need to be corrected or moved into constant dollars to do that, but that's something that we could bring back to you. It's, I don't feel comfortable right now just putting out a number because
I think it would be useful if we could see in the future, because there's so much, I think, confusion and misinformation out there. Because you have two ordinances, one for real and one that didn't make it.
Right.
There was dollars mentioned in the real one, and there was dollars mentioned in the one that didn't make it.
Yeah, so the real
There's
one.
variations, those estimates, and I'm not certain anybody knows what they're talking about on all these different.
Okay, so yeah, so the original estimates, which were from Transnet, came from a model that was built 15 years ago. And a lot has happened in the economy in the last 15 years. And so, you know, we had the Great Recession, we had the slow recovery, we had, you know, oil prices, lots of things happened. And so with hindsight now, we can go back and we can compare how we did over the last 15 years and what the forecast looks like now. But, yeah, things are significant.
Excuse me for interrupting, but it's that subject matter that led to some of the conclusions in the press that we're not going to have enough money to finish our projects. It had nothing to do with Prop A. It had to do with Transnet.
Yes.
And clearly, we've had variations for actuals for the last X years. That's a fact. Nothing we can even do about that. And then there conceivably was a difference of opinion on forecasts going forward. How big is that difference in the forecast going forward? I know you don't have.
And then we'll calculate. But I also just want to make it clear that the methodology that we were using prior, the logic and the models are all correct. And so when we talk about it theoretically and we say, can we do it this way and could this potentially happen? The answer is it might, given certain economic conditions, happen, right?
I'm not picking horses here.
Yeah,
I just want to know that the public is reading all this stuff, and I've never seen how significant are we even talking about in the range of these differences of opinion. That's all I'm asking.
And the only thing I'd like to caution against is that this forecast that we presented for the plan of finance, the one that's done externally, is not using the same modeling framework. It's not using a simultaneously solved equation model that we had in DEFM, where we take a look at how population and employment and all those things interact with each other. Okay, so you are comparing two separate modeling, and we'll get you the numbers, but I just want you to be aware that they're two different models.
Yeah,
it's not like
different numbers, but how much different are they?
Yeah.
That's all I'm asking.
Okay.
One of the things I think, when we talked about the plan of finance, we've been talking about, okay, the forecast projections for the sales tax measure for Transnet. We just talked about state and federal and have assumptions going in there. I think one thing I'd like to point out, that's half of the equation. The other half is project costs. And so when we looked at, can we complete the projects, that's something that's also been not as, you know, quite the attention going forward. In the presentation that we shared with the board, and the board did ask us, can we complete the projects? What are revenues looking like? You know, what does the Transnet hold for us in the year 2048? One of the biggest chunks also was, hey, we're taking a look at the most up-to-date project cost estimates, which come from, or derived from the latest version of the long-range plan, the RTP. And we've seen over time that even the assumptions we've made with regard to project costs for the major forward projects in the measure have in fact increased. They're higher, you know, notwithstanding inflation and all that. So that's also another part of the equation. So if I get back to what Dick was saying, where do we put this all together? Where do we figure out where we think we're going to stand at the end of 2048? Are all the projects going to come in? I don't think here as staff, you know, we can say, hey, we're going to guarantee you're going to raise this much money by 24 years in any kind of. It's a forecast. It's our best estimate, our educated guess at any point in time. So I think the discipline that comes in is the fact that annual plan of finances are done, and we revisit assumptions on both the revenue side and the cost side each year. You see it every year, the board sees it every year. And that's where, you know, we can get the best guess. Right now, we're in what, year 2017, sorry. So I have 31 more years until I get to 2048. I mean, it's hard to predict. Stepping back, if I look at the 20-year transnet measure, right? That was, did we get everything done? Did the region get everything done right when that measurement expired in 2009? No, we have 3 projects that were uncompleted. State Route 52, State Route 76, and Mid-Coast. State Route 52 has been completed, the one promised in the measure. 76, I think we're getting ready to open the last segment in the next year.
This year.
This year. And then Mid-Coast is underway, expected to be fully completed in the year 20, and open to service in the year 2021. So, you know, past history has shown there hasn't been, you know, the time technically the tax expires, it may or may not have been done. 3 of the projects were not done, but they are underway. So there was a commitment to continue it, and, you know, from at least this agency and the board, and we found funds to basically move it forward. So it's a hard thing to do, to forecast into the future. We do our best. I don't think anyone is trying to purposely inflate or numbers, I'd say, from a staff perspective. We're trying to do our best in terms of predicting what's going to happen 20, 30, 40 years from now.
Could I hit my third issue?
Oh, well, actually, before you get to that,
Okay.
to respond to
Right.
a couple of questions. So, and I think everybody agrees with you that, you know, forecasting is, it's a little bit of science, there's a whole lot of art, and, you know, every forecast ultimately is going to be wrong. I guess I would just maybe make one question and one request. I'm wondering if for this committee and whether, how you deal with it internally, I presume you go through a similar kind of thing. Each year prior to the presentation of the plan of finance, you know, I don't know what the workflow around that is, but if possible, prior to that presentation, if we could have a little bit of, perhaps your time, Ray, and anybody relevant from your staff, to actually, again, before the presentation is made, the meeting or 2 meetings, however the workflow permits, to specifically talk about the, you know, some of the key assumptions that you're going to be using for this particular year's plan of finance update, so that there is, so that nobody can question that there's full consideration and transparency of, you know, what those key assumptions are, what changes there have been, or, you know, give people opportunity to ask questions of maybe certain assumptions might be changed, just so that everybody's kind of all on the same page and, you know, there aren't any disputes about what it is, was, or should be. You know, personally, I think that would be helpful, you know, for us. And I think in the past we may have spoken to, you know, construction costs and a couple of things, but we might not have given it the full attention that it deserves. And going forward, I think that would be a helpful thing for us as a committee. So that
We will absolutely do that. That I would.
Okay. Then the other thing, and then for Kim, the question I ask you is, you know, there's obviously there has been a lot of confusion around this, and the, you know, the timing with Measure A certainly exacerbated the, you know, some people's points of view about that. I'm just curious. I noticed that I think Gary had sent something that some functions will be consolidated under Ray with regard to data analysis, or I can't recall the specifics of it that were mentioned in the letter last night. Is there anything else from sort of a management control standpoint that you guys are contemplating, just to make sure, process procedure-wise, that there isn't any of this kind of confusion going forward?
Yeah, and I think the one thing that we've shared and has been, we've been talking, responding to some of the media inquiries, is sort of uncovering what happened, right? When you look at DEFM, the demographic and economic forecasting model, Roy had rejoined us sort of back in August of 2015, and Marty was still working with us at the time, and that was purposeful, right, to try to have 2 economists at the same time, because there's a transfer of knowledge and how we've been doing on the finance updates, how we've been doing forecasting. So when he was here first looking at some of the data and the outputs coming out of DEFM and the last adopted series, I think there was some wanting to understand what these numbers were showing, why numbers coming out of our adopted forecast looked a little different relative to historical things. At the time, I don't believe there was reason that staff had no reason to doubt that the numbers were, I don't think wrong per se. They were coming out of a model that historically had been used for forecasts going back years and years. Some of the things coming out of the model, population, for example, or number of jobs, the housing units, and that such, all proved to be within reason. And so some of these outputs that were coming didn't make sense. Anything you want to add?
Oh, I just, yeah, because what we were looking at specifically was not sales tax revenue, so.
Right.
Right.
And one thing I kind of want to make clear, and I think we jumped to this conclusion, DEFM does not produce a sales tax revenue estimate. It doesn't, it's not something that spits out, when you put numbers in, it spits out a sales tax revenue estimate. There are certain factors that are used, population growth, other things that come to this number for taxable retail sales, that then is used, Marty has used in the past for different things to basically try to produce a sales tax revenue forecast, long term. So, at the time, there was some question about, hey, some of these numbers are looking odd, other outputs coming out of the model look fine. Staff's approach was, we're in the process of rebuilding, we want to rebuild this model, modernize this demographic and economic forecasting model. It was built decades ago. We need to put new assumptions, we need to build new, relook at the formulas and algorithms, redo coding. And that was in the work program. And at the time, that same group had said, hey, we're already revisiting this, let's take care of this issue and revisit this issue as part of the model modernization and update. It wasn't until, fall, I'd say, September, October timeframe last year when inquiries were being made, hey, are your forecasts right? Are you really going to get the numbers? Where we did, in fact, ask staff. Gary had called folks together and said, hey, let's figure this out. We're getting real specific inquiries on the forecast, on this number of taxable retail sales. Can we delve into it and see why our forecasts that have been showing this increase for multiple series back, multiple forecasts back is showing this? It really took a pretty concerted effort over a month and a half of both the economic staff and the demographic modeling staff meeting together, drilling down into spreadsheets, tables, information on how did we arrive at this number. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's based upon sort of a number of equations. They did sort of uncover what they finally found was the issue, was this aggregation of certain jobs and certain
Some of the source data was aggregated incorrectly. We have economic sectors that we use. We have, and then our vendor provides certain sectors, and so we have to aggregate those to come up with what we consider to be DEFM sectors. And there was a math error there where it was aggregated improperly.
Which in turn looked like, because they were in some high-wage sectors, income was higher, and therefore income's higher, it's one of the factors that feed into retail sales in general and taxable retail sales. So definitely an issue that we need to address, looking at data quality, data control. When we can come back, our board is, in our budget as we're moving forward, some of the things that we're including is truly looking at how all of these, number one, data quality, data control, making sure that something like this is caught early, that we put processes in place to make sure that this is sort of not replicated, that we have folks that maybe put the data in, but folks that have another eye and look at the numbers, and really having technical and economic staff work jointly and look what may make sense from a demographic point of view, maybe they'll make sense from an economic point of view. Kind of take a look at it that way. I mean, some of those procedures we have built in. So if I look at something like number of housing units, for example, we have the local jurisdictions plans. We put those in. We make some assumptions on how lands are going to develop. We sort of use the jurisdiction staff as a check. We say, okay, here's our assumptions, what we've made. Here's what's it's showing for growth in your city or the county. Does this make sense to you? So we have those checks and balances sort of built in on other things. We need to make sure we have that on all the data we use, stuff we create, stuff we survey, stuff we purchase, stuff we incorporate. So that's one thing. From a data perspective, we do feel there's someone that needs to sort of broadly at the agency own the data, be a database sort of data manager. And so that's a position we're discussing and including in the budget going forward. And like I said, this mapping process also, data in, data out, having this holistic view across the agency, and also mapping out how information that's derived from the models is used in other outputs. One thing, depending on how it's used, models weren't created to answer sort of all questions, right? So if I look back at our regional transportation model, the original models were created to give us a good sense of traffic, number of trips at a regional scale. If I use that same model and try to say, okay, what's going to happen in this, 10-block radius, it may or may not be the best model because it was never intended to do that. So we need to make sure that not just our transportation model, but our demographic and economic forecasting models, are they equipped to answer the questions that we want them to answer? Maybe they weren't ever developed to answer, those either fine questions or policy questions, because that's not how they were designed or intended, or we don't have the data to support that analysis. So those are some of the things that we're doing both from a staffing, from a process improvement, and kind of this mapping thing to really understand in these planning functions I'm relying on this, this sort of way to get there. Does that make sense? Sort of way.
Well, it's encouraging to see that you guys are thinking a lot about this, and I guess I would invite you perhaps if in 3 months, 6 months, whenever appropriate, to perhaps come back and give us an update.
Yeah, we'd be happy to do
as
that.
to some things that you're actually implementing. That would be great.
Okay.
The third point I wanted to raise, and as an aside, I fully support your intentions of coming up with range forecasts in the future. At least gives us a sensitivity around what ultimately has to be your point forecast for the most likely. But the question I had, and it really arose after your presentation last month, after the meeting, it occurred to me. If you're projecting forward and you're showing projections of transnets and you're relying on your assumption of the matching funds, the 3.4 factor or something, and the transnet funds are broken down to the major highway and transit projects, that's what gets the 3.4 multiple, if I'm understanding that correctly. The next meeting, if you bring a presentation for us to break out, my concern is in the projection for the transnet base that you've multiplied by the 3.4, as we go forward for the remainder of the transit program, a good chunk of that, as it relates to the highway and transit programs, is going to be debt service. And you don't get any 3.4 leverage off the debt service. So it's either going to drive up your factor that you need to assume, or it's going to have less funding assumed for the projects. And I just don't know the quantification about how significant that would be. So I think it would be useful to take a look at that.
We'll work with Andre on getting that.
Anybody else? I just had one more question when you mentioned ranges. I noticed, so on the revised Schedule 9, which then, by the way, the revision is very helpful, thank you for that. You're showing the low and the high as a plus minus 5%.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if 5% is a number that was picked because, well, it's kind of like a round number and it should encompass, a reasonable degree of variance. Or if you were to look back statistically to see what the actual variance was, is it actually close to 5%, or is it just trying to be generous?
Well, this is a good question. So what we're trying to do is move forward with producing ranges. The prior report also had a confidence interval that was wrapped around it. It was a 95% confidence interval. In order to calculate a confidence interval, you need historical data about how the model's performing. But we switched models completely, so I don't have any history about how this model performs. So what we moved to is just plus 5, minus 5 to give you a range, and it's similar to what you would get in a confidence interval. It's not exactly the same. As the model goes forward, we'll be able to give you, as part of the report, how close we were, and then we'll be able to develop a range in the future.
Yeah, this historically, the 5-year forecast has had a high-low. We've always done kind of high-low estimate and gone with the budgeted one. So it's just a slight difference because we're working on a model update.
Right. Okay. All right, thank you for a lively discussion. So next, Andre and Ray still in the hot seat, but we're going to talk about the overview of the financial markets.
Good morning. So we actually brought the last update to you in October, and quite a lot has happened in the market since then. Obviously, with the election of Trump, the stock market has rallied 10%, which has been called the Trump rally. That's been obviously good for the stock market participants. On the other hand, the bond market has really sold off. And just to give you an example, we issued our bonds back in August. The 10-year Treasury was at 1.6%. Today it's at 2.36%. So that's a 50% almost increase in interest rates since that time. So although the stock market has really enjoyed it, the bond market has suffered a little bit. So how does that relate to our debt portfolio in general? In general, it doesn't affect it because 95% of our bonds are fixed. So even if interest rates go up, it shouldn't affect it. We obviously do have a small portion in commercial paper. That was trading at approximately 50 basis points last time we met. Since then, the Fed has increased interest rates by 25 basis points, so we're trading at 74 basis points, which makes sense because it's gone up 25 basis points. And then also in our long-term portfolio, 23% of it is synthetically fixed-rate debt, which means that for the 2008 series of bonds that we have, which is $400 million outstanding, we have a swap portfolio on top of that. The one positive with interest rates going up is the mark-to-market valuation that we have on the portfolio has gone up by $50 million. Before we were in a negative position of $123 million, now we're in a negative position of $72 million. Again, that's just a book value that we write on our financial statements on an annual basis. But I guess the point of it is, as interest rates continue to increase, that mark-to-market value should eventually get to zero. Another maybe three times the Fed raises rates, we'll probably get there. That's what the Fed has said that they're going to.
At maturity, it is zero, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
At maturity, it is zero, isn't it?
At maturity, it is zero. So right now,
unless we're going to trade in those bonds, we don't really worry too much.
We don't worry about it, but it's just something, kind of noteworthy since it's
Counts like
kind
a
of quite a bit to our favor. The other thing that we've been working on for almost a year and a half now is our TIFIA loan. We finally got approval from the U.S. Department of Treasury, the Secretary, back in January. They approved us for the $570 million of the TIFIA loan. We're currently working on the loan documents, and we expect to bring the documents to the board this month and probably eventually execute it in March. So we're hoping that interest rates don't climb any further than what they are today, because basically our rate is locked at the 30-year Treasury plus 1 basis points, which today would be approximately 2.98%, which is still a very favorable rate. That's all really that's gone on since the last time. Unless you have any questions specifically about our portfolio, I'll turn it over to Ray to talk about the economy.
If you could refresh my memory, we don't have any near-term plans to go back to the capital markets.
No, it's currently our transit plan of finance shows that we're going approximately every 2 years. So we went in 2016, so the plan right now is sometime in 2020. Thanks.
And the TIFIA loan is how much that you're working on? 500?
$571 million.
531 million.
71.
70.
Thanks.
Let me ask a question, just kind of relates to the previous subject, I guess, but you had mentioned in passing, very hard for you to predict what's going to happen in the next 4 years. But one could make the argument that within those next 4 years, we might see a major increase in infrastructure spending. If by chance that effort was to take the same form as we saw under the previous administration, where shovel-ready projects, stand in line and see how good you look. Is prepared for any such eventuality that we could argue that we're at the head of the parade here with a lot of shovel-ready projects or projects that are half shoveled already, and we want to get hit with that first tranche of money?
We're chomping at the bid for more money.
Everybody is.
No, there are a number of projects that are either design finished or they're on their way to getting there within very few months. The I-5 North Coast Corridor, which includes highway improvements and rail improvements, that's probably the next biggest corridor that we have, and that could absorb literally hundreds of millions.
You're well situated to try to force yourself
Yes.
ahead of the line if it works that way.
Yes.
Yeah, there's at the state level, sorry, at the federal level, besides the, that $1 trillion package that's still to be determined, there's even discussions among the Republican caucus. There's portions of the caucus that would like earmarks back. We haven't had earmarks in several years, but that's where they said, hey, we want to help these projects. We don't want to just rely on the administration. So a lot of it's fluid. We're still kind of waiting to see how it's going to pan out. But
Right, going forward, I know as far as potential other revenue sources and all that, and maybe you're going to bring this up tomorrow at the board retreat in Jose, but with what's happening at the federal level, and then, of course, the state level was two measures moving through the legislature that might help, one a Senate bill and an Assembly bill. What's the, going forward here, maybe we can talk about it next month, I guess, but the presentation about after losing Measure A, how are we going to get more revenue?
Just very broadly, we continue to get our state and federal formula funds, and those, we anticipate to put to work on the next set of projects that are ready to go. Usually we try to use other people's money first, in the sense that if there is a discretionary kind of action at the federal level, and those dollars were to come in, we would put to work those dollars first, and essentially reserve our formula funds, say, for the next batch of projects. So it's a matter of managing the cash as it comes, using the least restrictive dollars first. And so, we'll continue to take a look at that. That's also part of the plan of finance exercise, and we understand that at the state level, there's the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor's proposal. Hopefully, one of those three will come out. If you look at the governor's proposal, for example, there is the potential for a restoration of some of the state dollars that were taken off from the I-5 corridor just last year, plus the possibility of not just restoring, but adding to those dollars. So, we're optimistic that something like that will occur. But in the meantime, we continue to get our formula funds, to continue with all these projects.
Brad and folks, I know some of you are going to join us at the retreat on Thursday at least. As part of the Thursday morning session, we will have both of our state and federal advocates down that work, and so that was one of the intents, to kind of have them share what's happening, what they're hearing in Washington and at Sacramento. Obviously there's proposals at the state level, right? Senator Bell's proposal and Assemblyman Frazier, the chairs respectively of the Senate Transportation and the Assembly Transportation Committees. And then the governor in his budget has his own proposal. I think, while we're hopeful, sometimes these other discussions at the state level with regard to California's sanctuary issue and things like that is causing noise, and sometimes it's sort of competing for attention. But they're there to sort of share what they're hearing, what sort of the latest is with regard to that.
Thank you.
So I do a lot of presentations at the beginning of the year talking about economic forecast, and I usually start out by saying this would be a lot easier to do if Hillary Clinton had won instead of Donald Trump. So just echoing back to what Kim said, the future is very difficult to predict with these type of forecasts. So 2016 looked a heck of a lot like 2015 did. If you just look at the numbers, we had relatively slow economic growth, and if you take all of the political and everything that happened, then we just look at the raw numbers. We had the fourth quarter coming in at about 1.9% growth in GDP. So for the full year, because it was ticked up a little bit in the third quarter of last year, we're looking at about 2% growth nationally. So again, it's another one of those really slow years where we're not at where we should be in terms of full economic growth. A lot of that is attributed to things that are outside the U.S. too. There's a lot of international issues like the Brexit and the Eurozone and everything that's happening in the Middle East continue to put pressure on the U.S. along with the strong dollar. So the U.S. isn't growing as fast. But when you take a look at San Diego, we've had kind of been a bright spot in the sense that we recorded 31,000 new jobs last year. It's a rate that's slightly faster than the rest of the nation. Our unemployment rate is down to 4.3%, which is essentially full employment. The problem with those, and that's great, the problem in that area is that wage growth has been very sluggish or non-existent. So when we take a look at this in real dollar terms, we see that there's been really no net increase in buying power in the last 10 years, and in some cases it's fallen. And so when you, even in the high-end groups, you're only looking at like the highest 25% of wage earners, their real rate of increase is only 0.25% per year. So, sorry, it's 0.47, it's almost 0.5% per year for the last 10 years. Very slow increases, but then you see other things like housing starting to pick up and costing more. And so it starts to put a squeeze on people's ability to pay things, you have disposable income to pay for things that would be like taxable retail sales. So you see that kind of spilling over. Gas prices have been low, and I started looking much more into why sales tax revenues fluctuate from one quarter to another. And gas is one of the largest components that we have. And if you take a look at what happened over the last year, second quarter of last year to the second quarter year before, we're about $1 million lower per quarter in terms of what we're collecting in sales tax revenue just from gas. And some of that is because the prices are lower, and some of it's because of the new trend or shift towards electric vehicles and better gas mileage vehicles. And so what ends up happening is that our revenue source there is affected. There's also been relatively weak auto sales. After we came out of the recession, it kind of sped up, and now it's starting to fall again, and that impacts our sales tax collection. Brick and mortar sales too. Retail sales have considerably changed over the last couple of years, and even this last year, as more and more people do online shopping. And so when you buy a package on Amazon, they're supposed to collect the sales tax for us locally, but in about 50% of the cases when you buy from Amazon, you're not buying from Amazon, you're buying from another vendor who may be out of state who's not collecting sales taxes. So, like this pair of shoes I'm wearing right now, I found on the internet. I would fully have expected to pay sales taxes on it, but I bought it from some store in Boston who shipped it, and I wasn't charged the sales tax on it. So we didn't collect that revenue either. So there's a lot of reasons for sales tax revenue to be weak, but those are the things that we're experiencing right now. The last thing that we saw in the last year that's been very difficult on our sales tax collection is the devaluation of the peso, or the strength of the dollar in relation to the peso, and people's ability to come across the border and spend money over here. And we see that slowing as San Diego's retail sales growth rate growing slower than, for instance, Orange County and some other counties that we should be comparable to. They're growing a little bit more than us, and I'm attributing some of that, not all of it, but some of it to this cross-border issue that we're facing. So depending on what happens, I mean, the economy looks like it's picking up a little bit. Depending on which channel you randomly flip to, we could be either growing 4 to 5% next year, or we could be going into a recession. I don't know. It depends on what you're listening to. But depending on how that goes out, comes out, we could see an increase in sales tax revenue next year. If consumer confidence goes up, inflation starts to pick up a little bit, people start to pay, start to spend a little bit more, we could see that take up a little bit. But a lot of this is going to depend on what actually gets through Congress, or what executive orders are stick. So one of the things that I'm going to be doing is monitoring these, at least in the short, the first 100 days, in terms of what potential things could happen that would impact us. It's really difficult to forecast, but with that said, I think it's going to be a very interesting year going forward in terms of both the political landscape and the economic landscape, both nationally and locally. So, thank you.
I have one question, Ray. You stated, and you read it every place, that wage growth has been minimal at best.
Yeah.
I really struggle with reconciling that with the anecdotal evidence, for example, about the healthcare. Healthcare wage rates are going through the roof, particularly here in San Diego. Well, I don't know of any public entity that has wage increases that are in a 0.25% a year rate. So if we have certain elements of the economy going up at higher or much higher rates than that, where are the offsetting things that bring the average down to the quarter?
That's a good question. So the healthcare employment numbers are going up. So there are a lot more jobs in healthcare. It doesn't translate necessarily into wages. There are a lot of low-income jobs that are being created in healthcare, like home healthcare, for instance, where it's $9, $10 an hour, and you combine that with an increase on the high end, but it averages out to actually be a decrease. So when you look at that sector as a whole, we actually have experienced since 2010 a decrease in real wages in healthcare. We see increases in biotech, for instance. There's about a 20% increase, I believe, in biotech. But then you look at things like construction, and you look at real estate, and you see significant decreases in wage rates for those industries. Retail is another one that was hit very hard. So the whole, and also the hospitality industry, which is a pretty big chunk of employment, has been relatively flat. It's or declining in terms of real wage rate growth.
You're saying the nature of the job growth, we've really seen a significant change in the composition of that job growth towards the lower wage structure. So
yeah, 70% of the jobs that we created since we came out of the recession have been below the median income. So they're low-paying jobs. So what you see happening is, people are what I would call underemployed. So you may have had a $100,000 job before the recession, and you've taken a lower-paying job, or maybe two jobs to make up for that. So you're not in the unemployment number. You look like you're employed, right? But now your wages have significantly come down, and I think a lot of that is what's driving this. It's the 70% job creation in the lower-paying sectors.
Thank
you. Is there even a ballparky kind of way that you can characterize the contribution to our local economy of the cross-border?
We are working on that as we speak. We're looking at trying to understand how the different clusters across the border work with each other and what the importance is. And there are some industries where there's a very important nexus, but we haven't gotten those numbers yet. But we're looking to quantify that as part of the work that we're doing going forward.
Or even with regard to sales tax, is there a way to see the amount of sales tax that is generated by people coming across the border, doing their shopping here, that kind of thing?
So with sales tax, there is a way to do it, and it's something that we could present at the next meeting because we have to go refresh the data. But we worked with Community Services about a year ago to take a look at trying to quantify geographically, because we are making an assumption that people who come across the border are shopping closer to the border, what the impact is on spending. It's difficult for us to know exactly what the difference is, but we did put together a little model that correlated the devaluation of the peso and how much buying power came down. So we could present those data, but I don't have those on the top of my head.
And maybe it's not material and worth going through the exercise. It's just as you allude to political risk, it just seems like that there's maybe a lot of uncertainty surrounding what may or may not happen vis-a-vis Mexico and the flows relating to Mexico from a political risk standpoint. So I was just curious.
We can update you.
Anything else? Great, thanks, Darren.
Thank you.
So next we'll hear from Keith from the Environmental Mitigation Program update.
Sarah Pierce is with me here today. I realize that the last presentation before your lunch is probably the most dangerous one to have because you're getting all hungry. But I will promise we will go quickly and make this as factual as possible.
This is the good news presentation.
Yeah, there's nothing that's going to make anybody mad.
Good. I did have a chance to talk to your Vice Chair, Dustin Fuller, about this program a couple weeks ago, so I gave him a little pre-briefing. So today is about an annual report on the Environmental Mitigation Program. I'm sorry my voice is a little bit raspy. I'm getting over a cold. Myself and Sarah Pierce are the lead staff members on this program. And as usual, we give you an annual report, and we have quarterly reports on the grant programs. So let me just give, I know you've seen this slide before. We've talked about the background of the environmental mitigation program, but it always makes me, I always like to bring it back to economics and reality of our infrastructure. So why are we doing the environmental mitigation program? So by background, anytime we build any infrastructure, whether it's a local street and road, or a highway, or a head rail, we have to compensate for those impacts. This is called the mitigation in my world. So the mitigation can be costly and cause delays. In the 27 years I've been doing this, one of the things I always hear is, why does environmental take so long? And the reason why it takes so long is because it's a myriad of different complexities of buying land, securing the right land, and getting the permits for it. So when the voters adopted the Transnet ordinance, they put a provision in there called the Environmental Mitigation Program. And simply put, the idea was if we do advanced mitigation, that is, if we buy large tracts of land early, and we manage those lands, we're going to be able to reduce our overall cost of building our infrastructure. We're going to be able to accelerate the delivery of those projects because we'll have secured that mitigation up front. We'll have implemented our regional habitat conservation plans and reduced any listing of species throughout the county. And that's probably the one thing that more listed species you have, the tougher and tougher it gets. So basically, we're beating inflation by doing this advanced mitigation. We're taking advantage of economy of scale, and we're buying these pre-approved mitigations. This is not a new idea. Way back in 1993, AASHTO, that's the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, came up with this idea. It was then picked up by the federal government with a terrible term called ecological. But yes, it's terrible. But the Sandex been the first to implement it. Orange County is the second one, and we have some Bay Area cities now taking this on. So there's an economic base in here. Richard, you're talking about shovel-ready projects. This makes them shovel-ready. This gets the permits. So as part of our Transnet ordinance, what we did is we said, stepped back in 2002, and we said, well, if you did a project-by-project basis, how much would it cost? And in 2002 dollars, total mitigation would be about $850 million. But if you did this advanced mitigation, the advanced mitigation would cost about $650 million for the mitigation component, yielding $200 million of economic benefit or cost savings. Those terms interchangeably. And we've had discussions in the past Italk about cost savings and economic benefits. So together, to implement the Transnet program, there was these two pots of funds to create. One was a biological mitigation fund for our mitigation of our transportation projects. And the second pot of funds was regional habitat conservation funds. And you can do that as the cost savings to help the regional preserve system so we don't reduce or degrade those lands that we've already set aside and to maintain the management and biological functions of those lands. You can think of it as taking care of what we already preserved. So let me just go over briefly those two funds. The Biological Mitigation Fund, this is when we're buying lands for local streets and roads and highways and rail projects. To date, we've acquired 39 properties. It's over 8,600 acres at a cost of $157 million. Not all of this money was Transnet funded. We were able to, by working with other jurisdictions at the local, state, and federal level, we were able to attract $30 million of acquisition funds. This allowed us to buy land that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to afford. In addition, we're already restoring 400 acres of property. You've heard about the North Coast Corridor that Jose mentioned. It's part of the I-5 widening, sometimes it's called. We are restoring a lot of the coastal wetlands, and that'll start out this next year and continue on. One thing I wanted to point out, if you haven't looked at our story map website here, I'm not going to click on it today for time reasons, but it has all the acquisitions we've made. And if you go down to the Keep San Diego Moving website under story map, it actually lets you drill down to every acquisition and get details on it. So for purposes of time, I'm not going to do that today. One of the things we always ask, we get questions about, well, how big is 8,600 acres? What's the perspective? So in your brochure, our graphics team, Helen Gallo's here today, I want to give her lots of credit. She came up with a nice brochure, and this figure came from our graphics team. 8,600 acres is about twice the size of Mission Bay. It's a lot of land. And it's a lot of land that we acquired during the recession. So we acquired it for less than what we'd be able to acquire it for today for. So that's good news as we go forward in terms of being able to say that we have got some cost savings going forward. I want to move over to the second fund. This is the fund to maintain the habitat preserve systems, the cost savings, or we call it Habitat Conservation Fund. For the, in 2008, the Sandag Board of Directors entered into a memorandum of agreement with Caltrans, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Department of Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife now. And they said, we're going to pilot out for 10 years, we're going to take $4 million, and we're going to allocate it towards regional management and monitoring to keep those open space systems secure and to make sure that we don't have any more listed species. So with that, we are in year 9. Year 10 will come up next year, and the MOU will expire, and I'll talk about the next steps on that in my presentation. With those funds, we've been able to look at wildfire recovery after wildfires. We've had 2 of the largest wildfires ever recorded in San Diego, and by the way, no species have been listed since then. So it's a good sign that we're actually on top of things. We're trying to figure out the best way to do management of these non-native grasses, which are very flashy in terms of fires and very fire prone. We're tracking our wildlife movements as we're building new corridors of transportation, and we're looking at the existing ones. How do wildlife move through those areas? We're doing species recovery. We've done the first gnatcatcher survey, working with our partners in Orange County and Riverside and to the north. We've restored habitat, and finally we've actually provided money for land management grants. So the land managers out in the region can actually restore and maintain their property with funding to help make sure that their lands aren't degrading as we're going forward. At this point, I'd actually turn it over to Sarah to talk about the land management grant program with she administers. And if you have time, we'll show you a little clip from one of our grantees. He can't be here today, but it has done a YouTube video. Can't be today, but it has done.
Thanks, Keith. So as you just heard, the Land Management Grant Program, it's a key component of this larger habitat conservation fund. As you can see on the map here, there have been 8 cycles of awards that have gone on since 2006. In total, 98 projects have been awarded funding from Sandag at a total of about $14.6 million in transnet funding. And that has leveraged an additional about $9.5 million in outside funds for these projects. As you've seen through the quarterly reports that come through here 4 times a year, we've had a variety of past projects that have been funded. Those have included signage, fencing, directional walkways, exotic species removal, and then also we've restored habitat that's been burned in those wildfires that Keith was just talking about. And again, just kind of thinking about this holistically, if we provide funding for land management, we increase the habitat suitability of these conserved lands, and thereby decrease the probability of future listing of species. So it's nice to kind of think about it in that particular way. I just wanted to highlight here that Sandag staff did conduct an audit in 2015. We went through our grant program. We looked at all the past projects that had been completed. We took a subset of those and we said, what's gone on? Have these made a difference in the environment? What's going on with our grant program? Can we improve it? And there are a couple of key findings from the audit. Of the projects that were audited, there were about 23 that we looked at in depth. They all had long-term benefits to the environment. They increased the resiliency of the habitat and thereby led to cost-effective management moving forward. And they also reduced the frequency and variety of unauthorized uses on conserved lands. So that was really great to see that they had that effect. Staff also asked grantees who've been awarded funding, are there suggestions for making the program better? And with those suggestions, plus our own observations of having been federally incorporated about 9 changes into the program that have gone into effect in this last cycle of grants moving forward. So as Keith mentioned, we do have a little video we'd like to show you. We've had something like 70 grants completed now, and we had a couple of grantees come to our regional planning and transportation committee meetings last week to kind of highlight some projects. They weren't able to be here today, but one of our grantees had put together on his own dime a really great summary video of some work that's been done in the Proctor Valley region, or Proctor Valley area. So think about the area between Chula Vista and Homola, if you've ever been on that road before, restoring some vernal pools out there. So we'd like to just show you maybe just the first 2 minutes of this. It gives a nice summary of the project.
And Again, this was not paid for by TransNet, this was on its own dime.
We are at the Proctor Valley Vernal Pool Restoration Project. It's a project of the Chaparral Lands Conservancy. And where we're located is just east of the subdivisions in eastern Chula Vista in South San Diego County and west of the rural community of Pool. Proctor Valley is a fairly remote, undeveloped valley. Some development may happen in the future, but most of the valley has been protected to protect City of San Diego reservoirs downstream, the Otay Lakes, and lots of endangered species and habitat protections on the Rancho Humboldt Ecological Reserve, among other areas. The land that we're standing on is owned by the City of San Diego Public Utilities Department, and this was an area that Proctor Valley for years, back in the 1990s, was sort of lawless. If you had a construction project and you wanted to dump your trash illegally, people came here and dumped their trash. So a lot of damage was done. In fact, we tracked satellite images of the site and found that most of the damage initially at the site was done in just a 6-month period. Off-road vehicle riding was rampant. On weekends, there would be hundreds of riders out there on motorcycles and quads running amok. Same thing with pickup trucks. And even to this day, when it rains, you see people driving down the road looking for places to drive their Jeeps. So unfortunately, this site that has these incredibly rare and special vernal pool wetlands was also picked by the off-road vehicle enthusiasts as a place to ride, probably in part because there was these neat mud holes. And unfortunately, those mud holes, of course, are the vernal pools, and they have lots of endangered species and sensitive issues. Today's kind of an exciting day because we're finally to the point, after years of preparation, years of permitting, planning, getting the restoration project ready, actually to the point where we're planting native plants. We're getting things in the ground. And we're here with one of our contractors today, Helix Environmental, and Larry Sword, who's going to be walking us through some of the details of the restoration project. Larry?
You get back to the PowerPoint here. That gives you a little flavor of what some of our grantees have used it for. So this is an exciting year for us. It's, as I mentioned, the memorandum of agreement expires next February. And so it's our chance to look back over 10 years and to evaluate the program. So next year we're going to be working on looking at the cost savings. I mentioned that the whole concept of these grants is having cost savings or economic benefit. So we'll be determining any cost savings or benefits that have occurred. In combination, we'll be doing an evaluation of how the EMP funding has helped benefit the regional preserve system and what gaps there still are in there. Those two items together will be brought forward with a recommendation and an amendment to the MOA. We're not sure what that recommendation will be, but they'll be brought to you through the normal process and on the way to the board potentially for another MOA signature. So economics, the environmental benefits together will lead to recommendations on future MOA. In addition, staff will continue to bring forward quarterly reports on land management grants as we've done throughout the entire program. That completes staff reports. Myself and Sarah are available to answer your questions.
Great. I have one question for you. In your report, you talked about the 3-acre site where you're removing the historic fill. I said you're now monitoring project success. Does anything ride on the degree of success, or you just kind of establish some baseline information?
No, we have certain criteria we have to meet. So you remove dirt, the plants come in, they have to have a certain cover. Like your garden, you can't just let the weeds grow. You have to actually make sure you...
If you don't achieve the success, then you don't get credit for that acreage?
And it continues on until you do achieve that success.
Well, it's important then with this environmental banking that you've done is that you keep getting the funding in order to maintain it in the way you want it to be, right?
That's correct.
Is that a problem, anticipated problem, or is it?
No, we're integrated into the plan of finance.
Okay.
The environmental mitigation program is part of TransNet. So as of right now, we're going forward.
Great, thank you. So other than pointing out that our next meeting is scheduled for March 8th, we're done for the day.
I will not be here on the 8th.
Anybody else know that they're not available?
I will be here, I will.
March 8th. Great, okay.
So one, two,
Have a quorum.
We'll check with Brad.
how many do we need?
Four out of seven.
Okay,
I think we got at least that.
yeah, yeah. Okay, we're good.
Besides this?
I think that's the only one.
Okay.
That we know.
Anybody else going up tomorrow at all?
I said I was, but I am not going to be able to make it, so we got to run that problem. Hopefully that eliminates it.
Brad is.
You give me good comments, I tell you.
Tell her what it is.